Dr. Chadwick. I will give you the time, and we'll go on for about an hour. He'll speak for about an hour, and then we'll have a break and then Q&A. Thank you.
If it weren't for the great people at this church, I'd come for the potluck. So, the question du jour is, what do we really know about dinosaurs? And by the way, the next 2 weeks in Tucson, you have one of the best non-philosophically tainted opportunities to see fossils and dinosaurs that you'll ever have in your life, anywhere. They don't tell you these are millions and billions of years old because they're trying to sell them to you. But if you haven't been down to look at the fossils that are available to be seen, you owe it to yourself to do that, right here in Tucson. So some of the questions that we want to ask when we're talking about dinosaurs, did they really exist? Now you probably think that's a silly question. I hope you think that. But I run into many people that really don't think dinosaurs existed. And I can tell you a story about a student I had who I had asked to come to work in my laboratory on a dinosaur bone preparation. And she hesitated, and I said, "What's the problem?" She said, "Well, I don't know if they exist." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, when I was in academy, or grade school probably, Adventist elementary school, our teacher made us look the other way when we went by the dinosaur skeletons at the museum." Okay, that's the kind of thing that we find in our culture, and it's pretty, there are a lot more people in that boat than I would like to think. So if we can establish number one, then we'll go on and talk about the other ones. So did dinosaurs really exist? Well, yes. Okay, can we say that's settled? Here's a skeleton of Sue at the Natural History Museum. And either that is the skeleton of an animal that walked around on the earth, or it's something somebody made up. And you also hear that criticism. Do they really look the way they're shown in the museum? Or did somebody just find a bone somewhere and make the rest up? Well, how do we know? Well, here's a bone. You see that up there at the top? I have had people tell me, well, dinosaurs are just made up. They find a bone somewhere and the rest of it they just fill in. Well, okay. No, not true. When a scientist puts a dinosaur together, he does the best job he can to make it look like what the dinosaur would have looked like. And furthermore, we have a lot of cases where we have whole dinosaurs still all put together, including their flesh. For example, the Dinosaurus is all there together, and you can even see the outlines of his limbs. Here, where the tissues were, and his skin. It's all there. So yes, we do know what dinosaurs look like. Here's another one. This is a Parasaurolophus, I think, called Leonardo. And again, the whole animal is there. His tail is missing over here because it was sticking out of the ground and got eroded away. But the rest of him was all there, and when they dug him out, he still had skin, still had the impressions of the skin and everything. So there, we know what that dinosaur looked like. And even Sue was 93% complete. And here's what it looked like in the ground. You can see here are the tail vertebrae over here, and it goes on around. The head's right there, I think. So yes, dinosaurs are real. Yes, they look like the way they're depicted as far as we can tell. But that's not all we have. We don't just have skeletons. We don't just have mummies. We have trackways that tell us that they were alive. And here is a very long sauropod trackway. I think this is over in France. Here is another set of tracks just going all over the place. Well, okay, if you're a skeptic, maybe somebody carved them, right? That's a little overkill if you just want to make a track. And here's one that'd be hard to carve. This is in Bolivia, I believe. And it's going straight up this face. Now, the dinosaur didn't climb that. Those layers have been tilted up like that. But I don't think anybody carved that. So we have a lot of tracks. We also have eggs, dinosaur eggs. We saw some yesterday at the Gem and Mineral Show. And not only do we have eggs with embryos in them, as you can see here. There's an egg that has the bones of the small dinosaur. Here's another one. This is actually a Psittacosaurus, a Parasaurolophus. So you can even tell what kind of dinosaurs they are. And that's how they can tell what the eggs are, because otherwise it's just a dinosaur egg. But when they find the remains of a little baby dinosaur inside, which they do in a small percentage of the eggs, then you can even tell what it belonged to. And we have skin impressions. This is from Leonardo, and you can see the scales of the dinosaur. And just this year in a coal mine, or just last year up in the coal mine in Canada or Alaska or somewhere, Canada I think, they found this Nodosaurus. Here's the head right here for reference, and this is a view from the top, and he's been squashed flat. But he's all there, you know, it shows all the features of the surface of the dinosaur. So, do dinosaurs really exist? Yes. Did they really look the way they're depicted in museums? Yes, more or less. How do we know? Because we have whole dinosaurs where all the bones are still together. And even where people make up bones that are missing for the dinosaur, they make them as much like what they think they should be as possible, because they don't want to be embarrassed by coming up with something that's not like the real thing. And that brings us down to another question altogether. What happened to the dinosaurs? Why aren't they here today? Why don't we have dinosaurs on the planet right now? And this brings up a very interesting issue, because one of the criticisms of the modern scientific enterprise is that scientists today, and this is written by top-notch scientists in the last 6 months. I've seen 2 different papers that discuss this. Scientists today are not rigorously testing for hypotheses. Instead, they're taking a dominant hypothesis and running with it and trying to make all the data fit. Science has gone astray from its original objective, a search for truth, to getting papers published and becoming famous and all those kinds of things. So these scientists were lamenting the fact that science does not consider alternatives to the dominant hypothesis. In 1890, a very well-respected geologist by the name of Thomas Chamberlain, wrote a paper and published it in Science called the theory of multiple working hypotheses. And what he said in there is, if you want to do good science, you want to do the best science you can, you think of every possible idea as an explanation, and then you test those ideas and eliminate as many as you can, and whatever is left over, whatever fits the data best, that becomes the explanation. And of course, this is a lot of work, because if you just have a dominant hypothesis, then you just focus in on that one thing and you show that you agree with it, then you're done. But if you have 10 different ideas about what happened to the dinosaurs, then it's not so easy. So you don't get this kind of cut and dried approach where you have one dominant hypothesis, which is the case right now in dinosaurs. Since work on the showing an asteroid was going to hit the Earth by Luis Alvarez, who is a physicist, Nobel Prize-winning physicist. That hypothesis has been shoved home into the community so deeply that it's very difficult for anyone to think there was another explanation besides that. In fact, it's been asserted that Luis Alvarez destroyed careers of other scientists who suggested other ideas than this dominant hypothesis. And so that gives you a little bit of insight into how science may not always be a rational, objective approach to truth. Sometimes we are pushing our own ideas a little too hard. So rather than just taking this single approach, let's look for multiple working hypotheses to ask ourselves what happened to the dinosaurs. So, okay, there's the idea that an asteroid hit the Earth and they all died. That's one idea. It's not the truth. It's not the only idea. In fact, there are many other ideas that have been proposed as to what happened to the dinosaurs. Let's just thumb through them quickly. Earth got too hot, the dinosaurs all died. Got too cold and they all died. Too dry, they all died. Too wet, they all died. Too little food, they all died. Too much food, they all died. And by the way, these are humorous, but they are all ideas that scientists have suggested in the literature. Poison food came along, they all died. That's kind of like with Leonard's whales this morning, remember? He had two hypotheses to explain the death of the whales, and that was one of them, poisoned food. So that's been proposed for dinosaurs. And this one was actually published in the literature, and I didn't put a picture there, but you get the idea. They died of constipation. Another very popular idea, and this is the one that this geologist from Stanford, PhD from Stanford, who taught at University of Pennsylvania, he proposed that it was volcanic activity that killed the dinosaurs. And he was the one that Luis Alvarez, he says, not only jeopardized his career and prevented him from getting promoted and preventing him from publishing papers, but also threatened to kill him. So that's what he documented. And of course, when you have this many ideas out there, the cartoonists are going to get on board, and so you get some really funny explanations for things. And the one I like best is this one. What really happened to the dinosaurs? They're big animals. Some of them are big animals. They looked at the ark and they saw these animals marching in 2 by 2. And I presented this, by the way, at a meeting I was at last week, 2 weeks ago now, in India, to 8,000 science educators, secular educators. Probably not a Christian in the bunch. And I told them about this one. And then I said this: you may laugh, or you may think that this idea has no merit. Certainly, the idea of dinosaurs being on the Earth a few thousand years ago instead of 65 million years ago doesn't set too easily. But we are now finding biological tissues inside the bones of dinosaurs which cannot possibly last for 1 million years, say nothing of 65 million years. Cannot possibly, according to the laws of thermodynamics, chemical thermodynamics, these tissues, these proteins and other materials, even red blood cells, these should have been gone long since. So if you're going to dismiss this out of hand without giving it consideration, you're going to have a better reason than just you don't like the idea of things happening so fast. So that's what I told these people. I just told you the same thing. So Okay, so what did happen to the dinosaurs? Well, there's a very interesting quotation in a book by Ellen White, Spiritual Gifts, in which she says, there was a class of very large animals before the flood that God did not see fit to preserve in the ark. Not because they were bad, but because man, in his weakened condition after the flood, is not going to be able to get along with these animals. Imagine you take 2 T-Rexes into the ark. They get out, and one of them's a female, and the female lays a clutch of 25 eggs. And I don't know if they had 1 or more clutches per season, but there's 25 T-Rexes next time around. And then there's 600 T-Rexes, and then there's 10 million T-Rexes. Who's going to feed all these T-Rexes? And how long is it going to be before they destroy man from off the earth? So what she says makes a lot of sense, and I think there may be some light to that. Nonetheless, let's take a look at our research project that we're working on in eastern Wyoming. Eastern Wyoming is a very interesting place. We've been working up there now since 1996. That's a little over 20 years. 21 years this year. We're in Niobrara County down here in the northeast corner. There's that corner map up there is shown here, the Powder River Basin. And we're down here in Niobrara County, which is the least populated county and the least populated state in the United States. So there are not very many people there. In fact, when we're there, we double the population, I would guess. We had 133 people there a couple of years ago. That was our record for a few days, fortunately. It wasn't for a long period of time. Here's what our camp looked like. We have a very nice facility. We have restrooms, men's and women's bathrooms. We have a kitchen. We have a dining room and classroom. We have satellite internet access. And we have private bedrooms for each participant. Well, you can see them there. Wyoming is an interesting place. It's never boring there. Having lived in California many years, the weather in California is boring, to say it in a word. It never changes. But in Wyoming, it changes moment by moment. So we have dramatic skies. Here's a tornado in the neighborhood, but it's very beautiful there. Just a few scenes from near where we're working. Notice there's one thing missing from these. Yeah, there are no trees. Very, very few trees. This is our camp taken a couple of years ago. We had weather front go through, and somebody said, oh, there's a rainbow there, and so we moved out here where we could center the camp on it. Got that spectacular view. These are some of the leaders of our camp. Larry Turner is a astrophysicist, actually. There's me. Keith Snyder is a taphonomist. He's head of biology at Southern. These people have come from all over the world to work here. Kathleen Wilson is in Thailand, and she comes each year to help us. Amy Teague is a high school teacher in Cleburne. Tyke Connell's an academy teacher in Keene. Stephen Gray, Justin Woods, Dr. Franco, Dr. Maloney, and others. This is where we're working out in the field. This is the place where we have many of our sites. And the reason we have them there is very simple. It's about a mile from our camp. And those little red dots are each one on a dinosaur bone at the surface. So you can see that there are a lot of bones exposed at the surface. And there are a lot of them around where we're digging. So many that we don't have to look to see where to dig. You can sit down anywhere and start digging and find bones. So let's take a look at what we're doing there. We're doing the science of taphonomy. Taphonomy is the study, as Dr. Brand mentioned this morning, the study of everything that happens to an organism after it, so from the time it's alive until it's dug up. So this includes what killed it, what was it doing when it died, what happened after it died, did it get buried right away, did it lay around, and all these kinds of considerations are what taphonomists do. So taphonomists need a lot of information about the fossils. They need to know a lot and keep track of every piece of data. In order to do this, we made some major innovations in how science of paleontology is done. We introduced, in the year 2000, we introduced the use of high-resolution GPS mapping into paleontology. We found out this technology was available, and we learned how to use it, brought it to our process. It starts with a base station. The base station is mounted in a permanent location that is known with an accuracy of plus or minus a few millimeters. And we put that GPS detector up there. On the top is a GPS satellite antenna. And then there's a radio on that big pole there, a radio antenna. This big monument right here knows exactly where it is because we've told the equipment this is where you are. So it takes a reading on all the satellites, and the satellites tell it it's over here or it's over there or it's somewhere else. And so it corrects it back to where it really is. And then it transmits that correction factor to the rover, which is the part that we carry around with us. And here you can see a bone down there at the bottom, and he's taking a point on that bone. And the rover also reads those satellites, and it gets a location, and then it gets a correction. There's a radio antenna up there at the top. It gets a correction from the base, and then it adds that correction in so that it brings it exactly to where it is. And here's a 1 centimeter square, that's that big, 1 centimeter square with 10 points inside. And there's the average values are off by just a few millimeters. So it's very accurate, plenty accurate for us to use for mapping. So when we find a bone in the ground, we bring in the GPS. We take a series of points that go directly into the computer without any human error. We take a picture of the bone, and then we extract the bone from the background in the picture, and then we orient that bone to match those points and then sync it there so that it's now georeferenced to those data. So we now have a picture of the bone that is exactly in the computer, exactly where the bone was in the ground. So we can now add back in the other bones around it and reconstruct the bones in the ground, the way they look in the ground without the dirt there. We developed all this at Southwestern Adventist University and presented it to the scientific community starting in the year 2000. And just this year, I guess it's 2016, we published a paper giving these techniques to other paleontologists, but we're now 20 years ahead of everybody else and growing. One of the interesting things is other paleontologists, they always acknowledge the superiority of this technique, but they also know that we're creationists. So they're reticent to follow in our footsteps. So they just keep doing the old meter square grid and drawing the pictures of the bones in there because they don't want to be doing something that we invented, which is fine with me. So let's take a look at one of the quarries. This is our main quarry. It started in the year 2000, and we dug out some bones a year before that I mapped in manually. And then these are the bones from the year 2000 and onward. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and then 17. You're the first people to see this because I just put it in. This is the way it looks now. So you're seeing something that nobody else on Earth is doing. Only us. Because we have all this data in the computer, we can do research all year long. So we can study these bones, we can reconstruct, we can get the direction of orientation of the bones and everything else right out of these diagrams. We can do a section through, it's three-dimensional, so we can do a section through it and look at the distribution of bones vertically as well. Just to show you how amazing this bone bed is, here's another site, and it looks just as, you see where it was. There's one we looked at last time, this is 2, and then number 8 over here. And you can see wherever we dig, there are a lot of bones. We average about 30 bones per square meter. So if you sit down in one spot and you dig down that one area, you're going to find at least 30 bones on average, which is 1/10 of a dinosaur. This is a special place that we got a bunch of bones out of for Nanotyrannus. We discovered the second Nanotyrannus that was ever found. Now, Nanotyrannus is a big deal. It's just had another movie made about it recently, in which they included some of our material by National Geographic. And they have written a book about it, and there have been at least 2 movies made centered on this particular taxon. Because the museum that has the third one that was found, they want it to be a T-Rex. Because which would you choose to go to? The museum that had the Nanotyrannus or the one that had the T-Rex? So they want a T-Rex. So they said, oh, that's a juvenile T-Rex. But it's not. Here's the upper jaw. And I'll just tell you a little funny story. Back in the early 2000s, when we had started our online database, we started in the year 2000, we built an online database, which you can go to today. And we thought, well, we ought to let people know about this because we've got all our bones on here. It was the only site on the internet with dinosaur bones that had pictures of every bone, still is. And so we advertised it to a place at Berkeley called Paleo Portal, which purported to have listed every site that had anything to do with fossils, including Joe Smith's homepage if he had a picture of a fossil on it. And we thought, well, they'll love to have this. And so I sent it in, and they sent me a note back saying they'd gotten it and that it'd be up in a couple of days. So I waited a week, and I looked, and I couldn't see it anywhere. Waited another week, I looked, I couldn't see it anywhere, so I wrote them back and said, what's going on here? And they said, oh, we weren't supposed to have sent you an acceptance. It's still out for review. So after 2 more months, I got a rejection notice that they weren't going to allow our site to be advertised because it was neither scientific nor educational. And I don't get mad very often, but I got mad. And so I went back to our bone collection, and I developed a technique to get 3-dimensional pictures of our bones. And so we have now the only site on the internet that has 3-dimensional pictures of all the bones. We also put in a mapping function so you can see the quarry with the bone highlighted for every bone that's been taken out of the ground. No other site in the world has that capability. We also have true virtual reality 3D images of many of our bones, and you can download and print your own 3D images of the bones off our website. So we have a lot of stuff there as a result of me getting upset because somebody had decided we were creationists and we shouldn't have our stuff represented on their website. So I never did bother to let them know how I felt. So here's an example. What I did is I made a little movie of what you can actually see if you go to the website. Let's see if it'll play. Yeah, so you can see the bone and you can turn it with your mouse and you can zoom in on it. It's really nice. It's an impressive website. 2 of the top paleontologists in the world have told me that there is no university anywhere that has anything like our website. They just are blown away when they see what we can do. So, okay, how much of this credit goes to me? And how much goes to God? You know, I'm telling you all this stuff like I did it. I did none of it. All I did was allow myself to be used by God to do what I feel like He wanted me to do. So I can't take any credit for this stuff. It's too good to have come out of my pocket. So anyway, I just want you to know that you have nothing to be ashamed of in our work. This is the lower jaw of that same animal. A couple of years ago we found this. That's the back, the underside of the shield of a Triceratops skull. Here's one of the horns, the other horn. And this is how big the skull is. So we cast it up. That's me laying underneath that thing, at the risk of my life, trying to get the underside sealed. And we got that out. It weighed about 1,000 pounds. And somehow after we got it off that pedestal, we had to get it out of that hole it's in. And that was a job in itself. We finally got it into the pickup truck, and we took it back to Keene, where it's presently being reconstructed. We also found while we were working on the Triceratops skull, which I didn't really want to take it out of the ground. You can see why. You know, it weighs 1,000 pounds. It's a huge liability. I don't want to mess it up. And so I put it off for quite a number of years, and finally the ranch said, look, you got to get that out of there. So I did. And when we were digging around it, we came across this. This is a Thescelosaurus, which is a smaller dinosaur. Right here is his backbone, and then many of the other bones there. We had about 70% of him that we recovered from that site. That's the first time we'd ever recovered a bunch of bones from one dinosaur. And so that was a big thing. This is actually a map of the quarry, and you can see here's the Triceratops skull here. This is the Thescelosaurus right here. This is part of this Triceratops. These bones here all belong to this guy. Up here is an Edmontosaurus, a duck-billed dinosaur, and you can see his backbone, his tail, is all there in one place. We have 80 vertebrae all out of his tail right now that we're prepping, and not only that, but here's his hindquarters up in that area up there. And we ran into a fence there. We have to go underneath the fence. It's on a cattle ranch, and so we've been digging underneath that fence, and we're going to find the rest of that guy there. And then over here is an oviraptor, which is what that first picture I showed you today is. That's an oviraptor. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 taxa at one site, which is really spectacular. And we gave a paper on this at Geological Society of America last year, and had a lot of interest in that you could get 4 different taxa from one site, all of them more or less intact. We've still got a lot more to go on that site. And that's all because we decided we had to take out that Triceratops. All right, well, let's talk about the science of dinosaurs. The most common explanation for why you find these giant bone beds like we have is there must have been a herd of dinosaurs crossing a river, and when they crossed the river during flood stage, some of them were drowned and swept downstream and got caught in the bend in the river, and the bones accumulated there year after year after year, and so you end up with this bone bed. Well, that's based on a model of wildebeest in Africa, which herds of millions of these wildebeest go across these rivers at flood stage, and sometimes 1,000 or more of them will drown. Well, it's 1,000 out of 1,000,000. It's no big deal to the herd, but that's a lot of bones. The only difference is you go there next year and look for the bones, you're not going to find them. Maybe you'll find 1 or 2 bones laying around. There's not going to be any pile of bones down there at that bend in the river. So this idea that this is how this bone bed accumulated doesn't work. So we're working on this bone bed. We're looking at all the aspects of it, trying to understand it. And here are the data. we don't see any orientation of the bones by current, so it doesn't look like they were in a river. The orientation is pretty random. The bones are mostly disarticulated, which means they're not associated together in skeletons. And you would expect if these carcasses were being swept downriver and caught in a bend in the river, you'd expect to find a carcass there buried. Except for what Dr. Brand talked about this morning. How fast does it take, how long does it take to bury a carcass that's this big? You know, that might be a problem. And the third thing we found is there's the distribution of ribs, for example. And again, this is something we can do because of our techniques. Keeping everything digital in the computer, I can say, show me all the ribs. And I can pull up a picture with just ribs. And nobody else can do that. That's an amazing bonus from this technology that we developed. Yeah, praise the Lord. Here's the big one, though. If you had, let's say, over a period of 1,000 years, every year these dinosaurs go across the river, some would get swept away, caught down the bend in the river. What would you expect the disposition of the bones to be? Well, you ought to have a carcass at this level, you ought to have a carcass at this level, a carcass at this level. As the sediments were swept down and burying these things, you ought to get a bunch of carcasses. You ought to have big bones here, big bones here, big bones here. That's not what we see. Instead, we see this. This is one of the quarries, and this is the bottom 2 decimeters, so about that far off the ground. And these are all big bones. This bone right here, that big bone right there is 1.5 meters long, just to give you a scale. These are big bones. Okay, so now we're going to go up 2 decimeters, and they're small bones. We go up 2 more decimeters, there's smaller bones yet. We go up 2 more decimeters, there's smaller bones yet. So we have a perfectly normal graded bed. Normally graded means big at the bottom, little at the top. How can you get a graded bed over a 100-year period? You can't. You can't. You should have big bones at every level if this is accumulated over a long period of time. The only way to get a graded bed is if all the bones are transported in a single event and deposited. Well, that sounds catastrophic to me. Bones are really well preserved. You can see some of these bones. They're just beautiful, pristine bones. And we estimate we have about 5,000 to 10,000 animals at this site, which would make it the largest site in the world by a long shot. We don't say that in public because we don't want somebody saying, oh, let's go take over that land. This is such a unique area. We should take that away from these ranchers. So I don't say that very much. But there's 5,000 or 10,000 animals there as a minimum. Look, I'll show you how we know that. Here is a overhead view in the computer showing the position of all the bones in white. We'll take this little red square over there and blow it up. That's just one little tiny part of this. And then we'll strip off all the overburden and we'll paint in what it would look like when it's all excavated. It's going to look like that. That's how many bones there are. And that's good science. That's based on what we actually find. How do we know how many dinosaurs we have? We take the number of bones we have in the collection, the number of square meters that we've excavated, and then we divide it out. And how many bones are there per animal? And then we divide it out, and we get this minimum animal representation here, 21 in about 165 meters. So that comes out to less than 1/10 of a dinosaur every square meter. So if you come and dig with us, and you take a position and you dig down that 1 square meter, you're going to find 1/10 of an animal. Oh, you also may find some amazing bones. So we proposed an alternative model based on what we find. The graded bed is most easily explained if you had a massive deposit along the shore somewhere that had all these dead animals that have decayed sitting in it, and then that whole mass of sediment was picked up and transported out into deeper water as a single debris flow. And that debris flow will order those bones by size. When it settles, it'll have a graded bed. The upper contact of that layer is very flat, and it has a sandstone over the top. And there's some other features that suggest that it can't be made by animals drowning when they cross the river. And here is the model we've presented at scientific meetings. We have a shallow sea out here. These animals have probably drowned. We don't know what killed them, but drowning is a good way to get rid of a lot of animals. It also works well with the idea of a global flood, doesn't it? And so these animals drown, and what happens to these animals? They're eating plants. These are duck-billed dinosaurs. They're eating plants. What happens to animals that eat plants when they die? They generate gas in their stomach and they bloat. So they're going to bloat and float. And so probably you had this vast sea of dead animals out here, and then a wind came along and it blew them onto the area over here on where the land was, and they stranded there. And while they were there, some animals that were still alive, because this was during the flood, some animals that were still alive needed something to eat and came over there and chewed on them. And this is why we find the shed teeth of T-Rexes and Nanotyrannuses and Dromaeosaurs and raptors, all these kinds of animals. Their shed teeth are associated with these bones. That's because they were feeding on these carcasses before the whole thing was done. And then somehow, maybe there was an earthquake or some other catastrophic event that remobilized these sediments. They were rehydrated, and they traveled out here at a very high speed. And they deposited that graded bed out there that we're digging up now and studying. So, conclusion. We've got a really interesting site to study, number one. Number two, it's not going to run out in my lifetime, I guarantee you. And if time lasts and the Lord doesn't return, this site will be excavated for 100 years. It's widely acknowledged, and this is a very important point, it's widely acknowledged that dinosaurs and many other forms were killed by a catastrophic event of global proportions. We went through all the scenarios, right? All those scenarios were catastrophic. They were all killing everything. And if it's an asteroid impact, that's fine. But if you're being willing to consider an asteroid impact to explain the demise of the dinosaurs, it's not a very big leap from there to a global flood, is it? The only problem you have is the time problem. So even at this stage in our experience, in our investigation, we're very confident that this can be accommodated in a global flood. And last of all, having our eyes wide open to alternatives is a good thing in science. Thank you. Here are some sites you may want to go to. This one here is the museum. You can go there and you can play with these bones. You can download them. You can print them if you want on a 3D printer and make your own bones, make your own dinosaur bones. And if you want to go take part in the project, this is the website for that. And I welcome any of you who are interested to explore that. All right. We are interested in taking some questions. I think maybe Leonard and Ed and anybody else that's involved. Okay. Okay. Sorry. I mean to take your